The 2000s were a magical time that saw the release of some of the best British rock albums ever. Okay, maybe not that one, but what are the best British rock albums of the 2000s? Let's find out. Hey everybody, it's Nick here with you. Welcome back to the Rock Squad channel.
I can't get a life if my heart's not in it.
So last week here on the channel, I listed my top 10 rock albums of the 1990s. I'll link that up for you here if you haven't watched that one. But I thought, you know what? It's time to progress to the next decade and talk about the 2000s because there are a lot of great British rock albums that came out in that decade. Before we get to the top 10 list, first, I have to list some honorable mentions. The first one being Travis and their record 12 Memories, one of my favorite Travis records from the 2000s. They continue to release really great music in the 2000s after being a stellar band during the latter half of the 1990s. So got to put some Travis and 12 Memories in there. And then the other honorable mention goes to Doves and their debut album called Lost Souls. There is another Doves album on the actual list, which I think is my favorite. That's why it's on the list. But Lost Souls, still an incredible debut album from Doves. One of my favorites from the 2000s. So those are my honorable mentions. In at number 10 of my top 10 British albums of the 2000s, we have Manic Street Preachers and Lifeblood. It's hard to admit as a British rock fan, but at the beginning of the 2000s, I was not a big Manic Street Preachers fan. I loved Everything Must Go. I loved This Is My Truth, Tell Me Yours, but they really lost me in 2001 with the release of Know Your Enemy, which is an album that I've come to appreciate a lot more over the years. But at the time, it really turned me off of listening to the Manic Street Preachers for a few years. And it wasn't until Lifeblood came out in 2004 that it reignited my love for the Manics, which is surprising because Lifeblood is a polarizing album for a lot of Manics fans. It's cold, it's electronic, and it's not really the catchiest of all the Manics albums.
Love of Richard Nixon, death without assassination. The love of Richard Nixon, yeah, they all betrayed you.
And while it brought me back into the fold, it alienated a lot of Manic Street Preachers fans until Send Away the Tigers came out 3 years later. But I love this record, maybe because it came out at a time when I was ready to hear it. I said this actually in my Manic Street Preachers rock albums ranked, is that different albums come along at different times in your life, and they just hit you in different ways depending on where you are in your life and depending on where you are as a fan of the band and you're in your own journey as a fan. So for the Manic Street Preachers, this just came out at the right time, and I love it. In at number 9, we have The Darkness and Permission to Land. This is one of those key British rock records that came out when I was in university. And at the time, my friend Ryan and I were both very much into British rock, heavy into Oasis, the Beatles, Zeppelin, Floyd, and a lot of those classic British bands. And my friend Ryan is the one who introduced The Darkness to me and played the album Permission to Land for me. And although it was a little bit weird at the time, it's just this really great big rock record. You have this big AC/DC-esque guitar sound and riffs with Justin Hawkins and his signature voice and falsetto. It was a lot to take in at the time, but it's remained a classic of the era. And after blasting it in the car, which is really where you should be listening to an album like Permission to Land, right from the get-go, it became one of my favorites. That's always the best way to listen to an album. If you can rock it in the car at loud volumes, you know that it's a keeper. Black Shuck is a killer opener. Get Your Hands Off My Woman, motherfucker. Love Is Only a Feeling, and I Believe in a Thing Called Love. This thing is stacked with hits. It's an over-the-top rock record, but in all the best ways possible, and it still holds up to this day. And since then, Justin Hawkins has become a YouTuber. Who would have thought? The Darkness just celebrated the 20th anniversary of Permission to Land. I am old. But they just released a deluxe edition of the album and went on tour. And this is an album that is totally worthy of that kind of treatment. In at number 8, we have Radiohead and In Rainbows. This album was a big deal when it came out in 2007 because Radiohead released the album online for free, or pay what you can, but come on, admit it, guys. We all downloaded it for free. And the 2000s were a great time for Radiohead, starting with Kid A in 2000, then moving through Amnesiac and Hail to the Thief, all three of which are great albums and deserve a spot on this list. But in my opinion, In Rainbows was the best Radiohead effort since The Bends and OK Computer. They mixed together all those experimental elements that they did on Kid A, Amnesiac, and Hail to the Thief, but then mixed them with proper songwriting, which is something some of the earlier 2000s albums lacked. And it's also the last Radiohead record that I truly enjoyed because after In Rainbows, the band went back into bleep bloop territory, which isn't horrible, but it felt kind of redundant for them to just go back to doing doing that and for the songwriting not really to match up. So I definitely lost interest in Radiohead after this. But Radiohead got the musical porridge just right on this record, and it shows in the songs. You have songs like 15 Steps, Body Snatchers, which is the first legit rocker that Radiohead wrote in a very long time. You have Nude, Weird Fishes, Jigsaw falling into place. There's a lot of really great tracks on it, Rainbows.
You're all I need. You're all I need. I'm in the middle of your picture, lying in the leaves.
And I'm not really one of those people that wishes Radiohead was a real rock band again. I kind of wish they would do a rock record. And I know that's not really going to happen, but I wish the band would go back and be able to find the sonic balance that they did on in Rainbows and do that on a future record. And at number 7 on my top 10 list of the best British rock albums of the 2000s, we have Hardi-fi and Stars of CCTV. I was really late to the Hardi-fi party. I got into them a couple years after this record came out, but I went back and listened to it and immediately became one of my favorite albums of the 2000s. I love the rock meets electronic meets pop vibe of Hardi-fi. Very, very cool stuff, especially the vocals of Richard Archer, who gives this band a lot of personality and whose influence I can hear on other bands who are out now, like especially like a band like Don Broco. I think like a band like Hardi-fi has definitely had an influence on their sound. And their output from the 2000s is all really solid. I dig this album the most because of the absolute crazy string of bangers and singles that they have on this track list. You have Cash Machine, which is a great song, Living for the Weekend, Stars of CCTV, Move On Now, Middle Eastern Holiday, Tied Up Too Tight. Such a great run of songs that makes for a great album.
I wonder if I'll ever get to where I need to be. Better believe it, I'm working for a cash machine.
And although they broke up a number of years ago, they actually just got back together for a British tour, which I think is super cool. I hope they put out some new music really soon. And I hope they get the recognition that they deserve as an absolutely top form British rock band that deserves a spot on this list. And I promise I won't do my bad British accent again in this video. Maybe. In at number 6, we have the debut album from Coldplay, Parachutes, released in 2000. I know not a lot of British rock bands would include Coldplay on this list because they've gotten so poppy over the years. And to be honest, I've kind of lost track of them as a band. But you can't argue that Parachutes is a great British rock record, probably because it's the least Coldplay of any of the albums that they've released. And while it still has great melodies, it's not as anthemic as A Rush of Blood to the Head and other albums that they've released in their discography. But it has such a nice, chill acoustic vibe to it that Coldplay never really returned to after the release of Parachutes. When you hear songs like Don't Panic and Shiver and Spies, Sparks, Trouble, there's a softness and a certain vibe to this album that the band has never really been able to replicate, probably on purpose because they don't like to repeat themselves. And it's because of that cozy vibe that I keep revisiting this album. This album, Coldplay Parachutes, is definitely a winter album for me. This is 100% an album that you listen to in the winter months. Coldplay hadn't yet become the big rock behemoth band that they've become since then, and they're probably, this album is a little less pretentious than some of their later material. But as far as debut albums go, you really can't beat Parachutes. It's a solid album, and you can't really take that away from Chris Martin and the boys. In at number 5, we have the debut album from the Kooks, Inside In, Inside Out. The Kooks are one of the better British rock bands to emerge from the 2000s with a knack for writing really catchy songs, and they still do to this day. Still a really super solid band. And their discography has been a little bit up and down for me over the years. I think their second album, Conk, is a really strong contender. Could have been on this list, but for me, the debut album from the Kooks is really where it's at. It just has that 2000s Brit rock / pop style that a lot of the bands from the UK spearheaded in the 2000s. You had bands like Razorlight, Hardi-fi, who were already on this list, Arctic Monkeys, Keane, and the Kaiser Chiefs. It's almost like a second or third or fourth wave of British rock bands from the 90s and 2000s that are all great, but the Kooks are probably my favorite of the bunch. You have great songs on this record. You have Eddie's Gun, Sofa Song, See the World, Naive. So many Kooks hits come from this record alone.
Won't you come on over, at the side of my sofa? Won't you come on over?
And it, like a lot of the bands on these lists, it set the band on the path for which they are known today, still writing great tunes and still a great export of British rock. I know I promised that I wouldn't do my British accent I'm trying. And at number 4, we have Oasis and Don't Believe the Truth. Yes, I know it's sacrilege for me not to have Oasis at the top of this list. And just like my best 90s British rock albums ever list, I couldn't include every Oasis album on this list, or else they would just dominate the entire thing. And don't get me wrong, I love Standing on the Shoulder of Giants. I love Heathen Chemistry. Dig Out Your Soul. Everybody knows I love the first half of that album before it falls off a cliff. But Don't Believe the Truth is by far the best Oasis album of the 2000s and probably the band's best album since Morning Glory. And like I said, I love all those albums very much, but there's just something about the Don't Believe the Truth album and the era of Oasis that really clicked for me. I think it was the last really great era for the band. It seemed like Oasis had clicked for the first time in a long time on Don't Believe the Truth. The overall songwriting, the aesthetic of the band, the sound of the record, everything came together and it resulted in a really great album and one of the best singles from Oasis too. Like Lila is an all-time banger and great Oasis single. And then you have 4 members of Oasis contributing songs for this record. You have Noel with his Mucky Fingers, Lila, The Importance of Being Idle, Part of the Queue, and Let There Be Love. Liam, I think, putting his best effort on this record, Love Like a Bomb, Guess God Thinks I'm Able. Gem, A Bell Will Ring is awesome. Andy, he finally gets some good songs on this record after being totally shafted during the Heathen Chemistry era. Andy has Turn Up the Sun and Keep the Dream Alive. All the songwriters on this record give their all, and it results in a really strong track list.
Give me a minute, a man's got a limit. I can't get a life if my heart's not in it.
It's a shame that the band only went on to release one more album, Dig Out Your Soul, in 2008. But for me, Don't Believe the Truth is the absolute height of Oasis in the 2000s. In at number 3 on my top 10 British rock albums of the 2000s, we have my boys, Biffy Clyro, and their 2009 fifth studio album, Only Revolutions. Now, I know that Biffy Clyro isn't necessarily a band that fits with a lot of the other bands on this list. But they're a lot heavier than a lot of the other bands on this list. But Biffy Clyro, one of my favorite rock bands of all time, one of my favorite British rock bands, Scottish rock bands, UK rock bands, whatever you want to say. They're a lot less pop than a lot of the other bands on this record, but they're Scottish. They're from the UK. I had to include them because this is one of my favorite records of the decade. And while Oasis is my favorite band of all time and always will be, Biffy Clyro is by far my favorite current active existing rock band, and I think the best rock band on the planet right now. And it was Only Revolutions that cracked my Biffy cherry all the way back in 2009, and I've never looked back. Biffy began their career as a mathy, kind of emo, hardcore band, but over the years evolved into a stadium rock behemoth that we know and love them today, and Only Revolutions was definitely the gateway to that part of their career. They went from being Biffy Clyro to becoming Biffy fucking Clyro.
Are creating all the bubbles at night. I'm chasing around, trying to pop them all the time.
And rightfully so. Right from the first epic stomps of the Captain into That Golden Rule, Bubbles, Mountains, Many of Horror, Boom, Blast, and Ruin, it's a solid record from front to back. And they've never looked back. Biffy has only gotten better and more epic as the 2010s and eventually 2020s came along, and they're still the best band on the planet right now, bar none, as far as I'm concerned. In at number 2, we have Doves and The Last Broadcast. They may not be Oasis, but Doves are another beloved band from Manchester. They were a band that I first got into back when I was in university. I saw the Caught by the River video on TV and immediately went out to the record store to buy The Last Broadcast on CD. And I immediately loved this record upon picking it up. Sounds like Words, There Goes the Fear with its monkey sounds and monkey drums. It sounds like you're playing Donkey Kong Country, as well as New York, Pounding, Caught by the River. This album is stacked with great tunes.
Give it all away. Give it all away now. Don't let it come apart. Don't want to see you come apart.
I love the first Doves album, Lost Souls. I put it on the honorable mentions, and I love the follow-up to this record, Some Cities, which came out in 2005. But for me, The Last Broadcast is the one. And there's a lot of nostalgia wrapped up in this record for me. It came out in university when I was, in a much more simpler time of my life. And I remember buying this record. I was in the UK at the time, along with a couple of friends. We went to Berwick Street, which was known at the time for having a lot of record shops and for being featured on the cover of the Oasis album, What's the Story, Morning Glory. It was on Berwick Street. I went into a record shop and I bought The Last Broadcast on vinyl for £3, £3. Can Can you believe that? I think that's like something like 100 Canadian dollars. But at the time, it was a good deal. And although I've kind of fallen off listening to the Dubs over the last bunch of years, still love the last broadcast, still love the band, and I hold the Dubs in absolute high regard as one of the best British rock bands of the 2000s, bar none. And in at number 1 on my top 10 list of the best British rock albums of the 2000s, we have Stereophonics and their 4th album, You Gotta Go There to Come Back. To me, the first 4 Stereophonics records are all classics, and they all culminate with this bona fide classic, which saw the band going in a different kind of direction, more of a blues, roots rock, soul direction that totally fit Kelly Jones's voice. The band had previously explored these styles on the album Jeep, but took it to the next level here with fuzzy guitars, soulful vocals, and really catchy songs. Help Me, She's Out of Her Mind, Maybe Tomorrow, Madam Helga, You Stole My Money, Honey, Jealousy, and some other really great chill tracks on here as well, like Getaway and Climbing the Wall. This is a great album from front to back. A lot of great memories associated with this.
'Cause maybe tomorrow I'll find my way.
Although I think this wasn't a huge commercial success for the Stereophonics, because after this record, they did a little bit of a 180. They changed their sound, went in favor of more of a straight ahead rock, alternative sound on the follow-up Language, Sex, Violence, Other, and they abandoned the blues rock, soul rock vibe of this, the Black Crowsy vibe of this, which I really enjoyed. And this is one of the very few Stereophonics albums that I own on vinyl. When the band stopped into Toronto back in 2005, it's been a long time. They went down to a local radio station in Toronto, Edge 102, 102.1 The Edge. They were doing an interview. I met the guys and I got them to sign my copy of You Gotta Go There to Come Back, my favorite Stereophonics record. And having this record signed, you know, having your favorite record by any band signed is really cool. And I just really, really treasure this. One of my favorite records in my collection. To me, the Stereophonics continue to be an awesome band, but they never really achieved what they did on this record. You Gotta Go There to Come Back. And that's why it's number 1 on my top 10 British rock albums of the 2000s. All right, guys, that is it. That is my top 10 list of the best British rock albums of the 2000s. Let me know what your favorite albums are in the comments below. If you like this video, make sure to toss us a like. If you love to rock out as much as we do here on the Rock Squad channel, make sure to smash that subscribe button and follow us on social media on Instagram and TikTok at Rock Squad Pod. But I'll see you guys again for another video here on the Rock Squad channel. Until then, rock on, everybody.